Licensed games had a tendency of being very hit or miss back in the day. Granted, nowadays it feels like we have lesser licensed-based games, but lately, Marvel has been having some high-quality experiences. Whether it be Insomniac's outstanding take on Spider-Man, or Eidos Montreal's excellent Guardians of the Galaxy game. In this episode, I want to take a look at every Marvel-based game for the GameCube. These range from movie-based titles and comic-based ones. So, which ones are Excelsior, and which ones are far from amazing? Sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Fantastic Four was published by Activision and developed by 7 studios. Not literally 7 different studios, that's the name of the developer. Playing through the events of the movie, this beat-em-up actually plays similar to XMen Legends, in which the players can swap between Mr. Fantastic, Invisible Woman, Human Torch, and The Thing, all on the fly. To mix things up, certain characters are needed to interact with objects in the environment to advance through levels. The combat is pretty solid from what I've played of this so far, and I do plan to revisit this to complete in the near future. The game does also have the voice cast from the movie itself, which adds to the authenticity of the game. It's a fairly basic beat 'em up, but it can still be fun, especially in co-op.
Hero's work is never done.
Hulk was published by Vivendi Universal Games and developed by Radical Entertainment. Taking place after the events of the first Hulk movie, this game has us playing as Bruce Banner trying to still find a way to cure himself from the gamma radiation in his body. Playing as the Hulk himself is a lot of fun, pummeling enemies with your fists and throwing objects at them. Interestingly, there are segments where you actually play as Bruce Banner himself, but these transition into stealth segments that are okay, but kind of pulls you away from the main fun you're here for. The controls are pretty solid for the most part, but the camera can be annoying as it's constantly switching positions. I do really like the cel-shaded visual style, but the soundtrack is very uninspired. Regardless, this one seems like a fun time from what I've played so far, and one that I do want to return to and finish. The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction was published by Sierra and developed by Radical Entertainment. This follow-up sequel to their previous efforts looked to improve upon everything they built on and give the Hulk open-world freedom to smash anything you want. The game has an original storyline and really was a massive improvement on its predecessor. Running around the environment, smashing things up, turning objects into weapons like steel gloves, or throwing rockets from a missile truck is awesome. This really is one of those games that nails the feel of being the Hulk. This is one that I've mentioned before in my top 10 licensed games video, and for good reason. If you've never played this and are looking for the quintessential Hulk experience, then The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction is a heck of a smashing good time.
Get that cargo loaded double time. The wolf is at the door.
Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects was published by EA and developed by Nihilistic. Okay, now this is a game that had a heck of a premise going for it. The original storyline was dark, in which many of our heroes have either gone missing or have been killed defending New York City from an alien invasion. The opening cinematic really sets the tone quite well and grabs your attention. The game is meant to be a 3D arena fighter, similar to something like Power Stone. However, the game's main mode is the story mode, which is actually a 3D brawler/platformer, and the majority of the content is locked behind this mode. While I love the idea for this, the execution of the game definitely missed its mark thanks to its absurdly unforgiving difficulty curve and inconsistent damage that enemies can dish out on you. Also, the collision detection can be a bit off at times, and the erratic frame rate will lead to occasional unresponsive control prompts. I will be covering a full review for this game one day, but this game's campaign is easily one of the most infuriating experiences on the GameCube. However, if you're here for the multiplayer fights, then there is some good fun to be had. SpiderMan was published by Activision and developed by Treyarch. Based on the 2002 hit film, Treyarch looked to take the gameplay mechanics from the PS1 and N64 Neversoft games and build upon that with a more fleshed out combo system and far more impressive visuals. I remember first playing this and seeing the graphics in action and couldn't believe the detail of New York City whenever you were swinging outside in levels. The game itself is pretty good, implementing a fun combat system and varied mission structure, including some stealth sequences. The aerial combat was also a good first attempt in the 3D space. This game has a ton of unlockables, where you can play as even the Green Goblin and Mary Jane, which is a fun addition, something that nowadays they would have charged you for. While not as memorable as the PS1 and N64 Classic, this was still a very good Spider-Man game and a good start on the 6th generation hardware.
Flying around at your age, Vulture. You'll hurt yourself. Wait, Vulture's down. Now's my chance to stop him for good.
SpiderMan II was published by Activision and developed by Treyarch. Now, here was a sequel that broke away from its predecessor and really introduced us to something we never saw in a Spider-Man game before, an open world to swing around. New York City was your playground, and the swinging was based on physics, as Spidey's webs would actually attach to buildings. This was very impressive back in the day, and went on to truly set the new standard for Spider-Man games. Combat was faster and also utilized dodging mechanics based on Spidey's spider sense tingling. Aside from the game's main missions, there were also plenty of side missions and challenges to tackle through Manhattan. Visually, the game is a bit scaled back, as the open world did require far more resources, so Spider-Man's character model is quite small, but the animations are pretty smooth. The soundtrack was great here, with KMFDM's tracks being used for the majority of the score as well. If you grew up in the 90s with anime, you'll know that band. While this one has aged quite a bit, it's still a great one to revisit and see where the gold standard was after all these years until the PS4's Insomniac Spider-Man game.
Go call the cops.
Spidey, over here.
I think you saved when you should have said. You guys are such a
Ultimate Spider-Man was published by Activision and developed by Treyarch. Breaking away from the movie-based games, Treyarch looked to further push the envelope after their Spider-Man II efforts. This time, they built a game based entirely on the Ultimate Spider-Man comic book series, and wanted to showcase a hand-drawn, cel-shaded art style that replicated the look and feel of the comic. It was essentially a comic book come to life, between the cutscenes playing as animated comic panels, and the game itself just looking like a comic book in action. The story here is all original and written by Brian Michael Bendis, and does a great job keeping you engaged from start to finish.
Hey you! Is that a rhinoceros horn, or you just happy to see? I'm so scared I can't even finish my lame joke.
In addition to all the Spidey action, you also get to play as Venom, who plays very differently. This dynamic works really well, as it also helps show the story of both sides as everything ties together. Also, aside from Manhattan, you can also swing around Peter Parker's borough, Queens. Ultimate Spider-Man was another game that I mentioned in my top 10 licensed games video, and I do still feel like this holds up as the best of the 3 Spider-Man games on the GameCube. If you haven't experienced this one yet, I highly recommend checking it out.
Safe to get in there.
XMen Legends was published by Activision and developed by Raven Software. This was a unique take with the X-Men characters, in which the game was an action RPG akin to something like Gauntlet or Diablo. The 4-player co-op game has you playing as a cast of X-Men characters, forming your own team, and was the foundation for later titles like XMen Legends 2 and the Marvel Ultimate Alliance series. This original storyline is based on the Ultimate X-Men universe, and it introduced a new character called Allison, but her codename was Magma, as Professor X and the X-Men try to help her cope with her new mutant abilities. Throughout the lengthy campaign, you will face numerous Brotherhood characters as well as Sentinels, all while trying to level up your characters, equip newly acquired gear, and improve your mutant powers. It was a unique title for sure. While more dated mechanically versus future titles of the same gameplay style, it's still a great time whether in solo or co-op. XMen Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse was published by Activision and developed by Raven Software. This follow-up to X-Men Legends looked to refine some of the mechanics and provide players with more of everything they came to love about the original. This time around, both the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants must team up to face a graver threat, Apocalypse. The game is basically similar to the first game, but adds a new game plus, which was oddly missing in the previous game, and adds online play, but that was completely absent on the GameCube version. I remember playing this on the PS2 with my brother back in the day, but I also remember falling asleep playing this one at one point because we always had to play it late at night since he was always out at the time. Don't take that at face value though as far as what the game's quality is. This is still another great installment that only got even better when Marvel Ultimate Alliance was released after this.
And stay down. I need more power to do that. Oh yeah! Woo! Mon ami, this is sweet!
X-Men Next Dimension was published by Activision and developed by Exact Entertainment. This entry was essentially a continuation to the PS1 fighting games X-Men Mutant Academy. It built upon the fighting mechanics in those games while adding far more characters and interactive stages where you can knock opponents to different tiers of the environment, similar to the Dead or Alive series. There's a story mode here that is pretty decent and that will be your main method of unlocking everything the game has to offer, or you could just enter a cheat code and unlock everything too. While it's not the nicest looking game by any means, the game does at least run at 60 frames per second. The combo system does take some time to learn, but once you do, you'll be pulling off massive combos. There's even some aerial combat that you can initiate, and learning how to combo airborne and link your combos all together is pretty sweet. Every character in this game does have a ton of costumes as well, ranging from their comic outfits, the movie outfits, and some originally designed costumes as well. It's a solid fighting game that I have fond memories playing back in the day for sure. X2 Wolverines Revenge was published by Activision and developed by Gene Pool. It may have the X2 title, but this has no relation with the X2 movie at all. Instead, what we have is an original storyline penned by writing veteran Larry Hama, and it's easily the takeaway of the game. Take away the intriguing story though, and what we're left with is one of the most underwhelming games in the lineup of Marvel games here. Mixing platforming, stealth, and combat, Wolverines Revenge is a game that tries to build a worthy game around this character, but ends up just being so sloppily done, and it's not all that engaging to play. Also, add in the fact that Wolverine dies way too quickly, and remember, this is a character that not only regenerates his wounds, but he's one of the toughest X-Men characters, and you're left with a very disappointing experience. Now, I've mentioned this game in my top 10 most disappointing games episode, and one day I may do an actual full review on this so I can get more in depth about it. Honestly, this game is best played with the invincibility cheat, just so that you can feel badass as Wolverine. Then again, just play the X-Men Origins Wolverine game on the PS3 or 360, as that's easily the best Wolverine game and one of the best licensed games ever made. X-Men the official game was published by Activision and developed by Z-Axis. While a strange name for a game, because it kind of makes it sound like none of the other X-Men games were official, this is actually a pretty fun game that changes up the formula a bit. It's a third-person action game where you'll play as Wolverine, Iceman, and Nightcrawler. Each character plays very differently and has their own levels to tackle. Wolverine is more brawler-based, whereas Iceman strictly slides around airborne with his ice ability, and Nightcrawler is a blend of action and platforming. While it is based on the X-Men Last Stand film, the story is mostly separate from the movie itself, minus a few little things here and there. Z-Axis have always been known for their Dave Mirra's freestyle BMX games and aggressive inline, but I'm glad that they've tackled something totally different for them and actually made a solid X-Men game in the process. While nowhere near amazing or uncanny, it's a fun time from start to finish and one of the better X-Men games in my opinion. And there you have it, folks. These are all 12 Marvel games that released on the GameCube. Now, there are many titles that never released on the GameCube that the PlayStation 2 and Xbox received. Games like Ghost Rider and The Punisher, just to name a few. And it's a shame because those two in particular that I just named are actually really good ones as well. However, for the most part, the GameCube did have a nice variety of titles from Marvel, as well as some of the most highly regarded ones. That being said, which of these games did you play? Any favorites here? Any you never played? Sound off in the comments below, and I will catch you all in the next video.